What's up guys? You're watching Poot's Garage. This week we're doing something a little bit different. We're going to disassemble my brand new 2024 Jeep Rubicon. But first I gotta switch some vehicles around. So behind me is my almost brand new 2024 Jeep Wrangler Rubicon. Now I know most of my viewers are here for the square body content. Don't worry, that's not going anywhere. We're still working on that. Kind of putting things on, I don't know, kind of hold right now while I kind of figure some other things out for that before I really get it out and start using it. So until then, we get to do something with the Jeep. And there's something that's been bugging me since I bought this thing, and that's, it's just something I just gotta know. And that's about the full float rear axle on these new 2024s. There's just no information out there on it. So I'm really curious about how they did it, what's going on back there, and nobody else is, that I can find has pulled anything apart to really see how things work and what's going on back there. So my goal today is actually to disassemble one of the rear corners on this thing, pull the wheels off, pull the brakes off. I don't think I want to pull an axle shaft out, but I want to dig in a little deeper and just see how they did a full float axle without having like a giant hub, like on like a 14 bolt rear end, such as this. This is an old 14 bolt full float rear axle, and this is what I'm used to seeing when you get a full float axle. You got a big old axle shaft mounted to the hub, everything sticks out past the wheel, and it's just like, it's very intrusive. And obviously this is 8 lug, and the Jeep is only a 5 lug, 6 lug? I don't remember now. So yeah, I want to see what the difference is between this and the Jeep. As you can see, we don't have a giant hub sticking out here. Okay, it's obviously a 5 lug, I figured that out now. We're doing good. So I want to see how they attach the axle to a full float rear end in something like this. And just so you know, it is a 2024. It's got the big screen inside. They all come with that now. It's got the new redesigned grille. And I can't think off the top of my head what else makes it a 2024. But yeah, let's dig into the rear axle. And I did want to just show the rear axle here. Well, it's just sitting here, and you know, I've kind of looked at the rear end here, and you can't really see anything that screams like, hey, this is different, you know. It just looks like it has the standard bearing mounting bolts and the standard brake caliper mounting bolts and stuff like that. So yeah, let's dig in. Yo, before we continue this video, we got to get to the maps. So what we do is you comment where you're watching from, and I'll put a red pin on the map. We got 14 locations to get through this week. First up is Cripple Creek, Colorado. Then Washington Courthouse, Ohio. Churchville, Virginia. Casablanca, New Mexico. Marinette, Wisconsin. Eastvale, California. Moriarty, New Mexico. Burlington, Ontario, Canada. West Jordan, Utah. Hot Springs, Arkansas. Ruidoso Downs, New Mexico. Howard City, Michigan. Indio, California. And last is Greenville, Texas. And that's all the pins for this week. So keep calling out them cities, them states, them countries, whatever you want to represent. Let's get back to the video. So I mentioned before that the reason I'm doing this is because I can't find any information on this. It's been, I feel like it's almost like a secret right now. So that was one of the big selling points of the 2024 model Wranglers, was this full floating rear axle, which is, it's basically the same exact rear end that they've had for years. It's the Dana 44, or, well, it's not really a Dana 44 anymore. It's the metric version, which is like a M220 or something like that. I don't know. It's a lot better than the old Dana 44s, but they touted this new full float axle for 2024, and it's got increased tow capacities and all sorts of stuff, but they don't go in depth on it at all. And I don't know, there's a lot of misconceptions online about, like, are all models getting it? Are just the Rubicons getting it? Are just the 392 Jeeps getting it? Like, who knows? Like, nobody knows anything about this thing, and I don't know, Jeep hasn't said anything. I've searched online forums, I can't find anything. I've asked around on, you know, Facebook pages, got no answers, and so I just want to know what's going on in this axle. I'm not going to go too crazy on disassembling. I'm not, you know, going to pull gear oil out and stuff like that. I don't want to get too involved, but I do want to pull off, like, the wheel, maybe the brakes, stuff like that. I'm not too afraid to do that little bit of work. I can do that. Yeah, it's under warranty, but I do want to say that these new Jeeps are awesome. They drive so nice. Yeah, they're loaded with electronics, and that's just kind of the way of the world nowadays, but it drives so nice, and it's like you're just driving a normal car almost on the freeway or whatever. This one being the two-door, it is a little like jittery over, you know, bumpy sections in the highway, or I don't know, it's a little twitchy sometimes just because of the short wheelbase, but nothing like the really old Jeeps. You know, those were a real handful. Apparently, my wheel lock key is not in there. But yeah, these are just like driving new cars nowadays. It's pretty easy to drive around and scoot around and do everything you need to do. Where the hell is my wheel lock key? Where did I put it? I swore it was on the back. Apparently it's not in here either. I remember where it's at now. It's in here. Aha! Well, there's our first look with the wheel off, at least. Everything's so nice and clean in here. This Jeep does have 2,000 miles on it, so it's not completely brand new, but it's pretty fresh. First thing I notice on what normally would be the axle shaft, which I assume is not, but yeah, I might be wrong still, is this guy here. It sounds hollow, so I think it's just a cover of some sort. I assume this is a unit bearing on the outside, so I'm kind of curious, and I can't really tell a whole lot from looking inside, besides there's 4 big bolts holding something on. Yeah, we'll pull this rotor off and these calipers and let's see what's under there. I guess I should explain what a full floating axle actually is. I guess they call a semi-float axle, which I would consider like a conventional axle, like on a light duty truck or something. Your wheel mounts to the axle shaft itself. Your studs are on the end of the axle shaft. So the wheel mounts to the axle shaft itself. The weight of the vehicle is literally on the end of the axle shaft. And then from there, you have a axle bearing, and that's what it puts the weight up to, like, you know, the axle tube. But the weight of the vehicle is specifically on the end of the axle shaft. So if you break the axle shaft, your wheel comes off. Now on a full floating axle, what that actually means is the weight of the vehicle is actually on the axle tubes themselves. They're not on the actual end of the axle shaft. So the wheel mounts to a hub, and that hub is directly mounted to the axle tube. So all the weight is basically on the axle tube. The axle itself is supporting it. Now the axle shaft is just basically floating in between the hub and, you know, the differential. Now you'll see the axle shaft actually come out the outside of the hub because it's just bolted to the outside, but the weight of the vehicle is actually not on the axle shaft. So that's what I'm trying to figure out, is how they did this. So I'm gonna guess, I don't know how much further I want to dig into this because you start getting into torque specs and this might actually pull out the axle shaft, which I really don't want to do right now. But this looks like a unit bearing to me. So the unit bearing is mounted here, so all the weight of the vehicle is literally on the unit bearing itself, which is mounted directly to the end of the axle tube. So all the weight of the vehicle is right here. The axle shaft itself is not this. This is not the axle shaft, I don't believe. I believe the axle shaft is gonna be splined in from the back side of this, and so the weight of it's not directly on the axle shaft itself. And I can see where this center cap, I can see where it actually comes off. You probably have to pop it out from the inside. I don't wanna try and take it off the way it is now. You know what? I changed my mind. I'm gonna go a little deeper into this. So this is what I'm looking at right now. This, I assume, is the actual unit bearing here. Goes in there, it mounts at 4 locations all the way around into the end of the axle tube. In the back side, you can see we have nuts on this that are attaching everything as well. So you can kind of see there's a lot going on the end of this thing. It's also hard to tell with the parking brake in place, but this has got to be like a unit bearing here. So I do want to go just a little deeper. I'm gonna see what happens if I take those 4 nuts off. See what's going on in there. I just don't want the studs to come out with them. That's my biggest thing. All right, here it is. I'm extremely nervous for doing this on a brand new vehicle I know nothing about. We got the axle shaft slid out. I'm really glad I'm doing this just so I can see how things work in here too. So you can see we got this huge housing on the end of the axle tube. It's just this big chunk welded on. That's what's supporting the weight of the vehicle right there. Our axle shaft is coming through. It looks like the shaft is probably splined in there. I'm not pulling that part out. I don't want to go that far because there's a seal there I don't want to disturb. And you can see that there's an inner and an outer, I believe. So this is kind of your bearing surfaces in between here. That's what's supporting the weight of your vehicle, not the axle shaft, as I keep saying. Right here on the outer edge is an O-ring. I thought it was a seal at first. I thought this whole thing was a seal that popped out, and I was like, oh no. But it's just an O-ring. So that O-ring just rides inside of this housing here, this axle housing. But yeah, that pretty much answers all my questions. It's got just an O-ring seal there. It's gonna have some sort of a seal somewhere in there for the oil also to keep it from coming out. It's probably on the outside of the hub, maybe. The axle shaft does taper down a little bit right at the end there. Quite a bit. So that might be a weak point right there. There, you can see how much the axle shaft tapers down to go into the bearing. Now I don't know how this axle shaft is retained in there. I don't know if it's got some, just like a seat, like a clip on the end of the shaft that just kind of pops in, kind of like a CV joint, if you will. Or if it has more a nut and a bolt inside the cap on the outside. There's something under here, but I'm not gonna try and pop that off because I just don't want to play that game. If I had to guess, you would pull this whole assembly out and you can probably just pull that shaft out of the bearing itself, and that's probably all it is. But yeah, now my curiosity has been met. I've seen enough. I've gotten this thing disassembled. I saw what I needed to see, so now I'm gonna attempt to put this thing back together without breaking anything, because I don't know if you can get any parts for this yet. Okay. Alright, I was just about to put this thing back together, and as I was lifting it all kind of back in, I noticed the shaft was sliding in and out real easy, so I just said screw it, and I pulled it out. And yeah, it is definitely a full floating axle. So it definitely has a separate shaft This is a interesting little shaft going on here. So it's basically just gonna be splined on the inside, splined on the outside, and it's just a straight shaft. Hopefully that'll make them cheaper. You can see our taper there. I measured the taper, it comes down to about 1.37. So yeah, it does taper down from 1.5 to 1.37 or so. So yeah, it does taper down a little bit. So that'll probably be a weak point right there, which is kind of good if you do wheel these things and break them. If it breaks right there, it's easier to get everything out. So I don't know. Kind of cool, kind of interesting. I didn't think it was just gonna slide out on its own like that. So it's really interesting. That answers that question. We're all back together. Everything's ready to go. Didn't break nothing, not worried about anything. The only seal that's in there is just an O-ring, which is actually really nice. It makes the whole system really simple. So I'm kind of excited. It's a good little thing to know in there. Now I understand what goes on in there, and if I were to break something or I need to work on something, I know what I'm doing. That's pretty cool. This is the first time I have seen the new 2024 full float axle disassembled. I haven't been able to find any pictures or anything of it online. So I'm really excited about that, and hopefully it's the first time you guys have seen it too, so make sure you give me a good like, comment, and subscribe, because we're a growing YouTube channel. I want to make this into something big, so thank you, and I'll talk to you guys later.